One of the problems with the internet is actually the vast majority of people who are in happy marriages, have stable homes, have their kids, whatever, they're not on Twitter, they're not on Instagram, they're not on YouTube. Like, they're not out there doing all this stuff and talking about it. And I fully understand that, and I get that, look, not everyone wants to be a social media influencer. People like to have their privacy, especially when it comes to their wife, their children, all of these things and whatever. But I can tell you that nothing makes me want to be a father more than seeing my brothers, my friends, my people around me, people online, like you saying, like, yeah, I've got 4 kids, I've got my 5th on the way. I'm like, man, that's lit. Like, you know, you might be looking at me like, man, I want to get in better shape. I'm like, man, I want to have 5 kids too. I want to, you see, so we influence each other, right? It rubs off. But if you were there saying like, oh, like marriage sucks, this is the worst thing I've been, you know, telling guys like, guys, don't do it, don't do this. Like, my kids are the bane of my life. They're waking me up all the time. I just had to do this, right? You get that also impacts people. Yeah. And I don't think people recognize just how much we all influence each other. So when people are constantly hearing, look, kids are going to ruin your life, like, don't do this, don't do that, it's not harmless. Like, it does make people go, ugh, you know what, actually, you know, and I think that, because the thing is, I don't know, because there's elements of truth to all of it. Sure. Right? Yes, I'm not a father yet. But I know from being an uncle times 10 and seeing lots of people go through I know having kids is simultaneously wonderful and makes people super joyous and makes people super stressed and tired. Or like, it's all true. It's like, it's all of these things together. But when people are only hearing, look, these are the cons, these are the negatives, these are the downsides to it all, then it makes people very rationally go, you know what, I don't want to do that. Or let me massively delay it, let me push it back. And then it leads to more issues. Coming back to your point, I absolutely agree and have made that point myself, that I do understand where the sort of modern female mindset of that kind of go getter, I want to be a boss girl, I don't need a man. Like, I totally get where it comes from. Mm-hmm. I think we have to remember that we're living in a time, even just in this country, where unfortunately, you know, I'd say probably at least 100 million people, you know, probably at least a third of the population are coming from some type of broken or disordered home, right? So there are millions of young men out there who have never seen fatherhood modeled well, or seeing, you know, being a husband modeled well. There are millions of women who have not, you know, their father either he just bounced or they don't know him, or there was some type of abuse going on or whatever. And I can fully understand why they'd be like, look, I don't want to put myself in a position where I absolutely need to rely on a man. And if I had a daughter, I would want her to be educated. I would want her to be competent. I would want her to have the ability. So, you know, I think we can walk and chew gum at the same time. I'm not sitting here saying like let's ban women going to university, or like, you know, I'm not trying to restrict people's, you know, fundamental rights and ability to make choices. However, being competent on your own doesn't mean that you don't need anyone else, let alone someone of the opposite sex. I'm extremely competent. I don't technically need a woman to survive, right? Like, I can live my life for many, many decades and financially, and so I'm fine, right? But I'm missing at least half of the possibility of life if I choose that path. If I decide, okay, you know, I'm never going to get married, I'm never going to have children, I'm just closing off. I'm not just deciding I'm not going to be a father. I'm deciding I'm never going to be a grandfather. I'm deciding that when I'm 70, 80 years old and I've got all my millions of dollars or pounds and I'm sitting there, oh great, what am I going to do? You don't want to be the old guy in the club who's there still trying to pull, you know what I mean? Like, yeah, I think a big problem in our society is I think people don't really think past the age of 40, especially when I talk to young people, and maybe I've been here myself. People think of life up until maybe 40-ish, right? So you talk to someone who's 20, whether it's a guy or a girl, and they're thinking just of that. They're not thinking of like, okay, what am I going to do between 40 and 90? And everyone I know who's in that age range, especially let's say 50 to 90, the thing that gives them joy and contentedness and a sense of purpose and meaning and everything, it's their family. Mm-hmm. it's their family. It's not their even super accomplished people. It's not, their career. Career's cool, money's cool, but once you've got a certain point, it's like, okay, cool. Like, what do I do do I just keep more? Like, how much stuff do you need? Don't you want to share those resources with other people? Don't you want to help, invest, create something for generations, create that legacy? And I think to most people around the world, all of this stuff, it's funny because around most of the world, and I know this because I travel all the time and the culture I'm from, all of this stuff is really obvious. And it's always been obvious. For thousands and thousands of years, people have done it for a reason, right? And now we have the option to, it's funny, we have the luxury of even having the option to like pontificate about these ideas and to think, maybe we should rethink this whole thing. Maybe, maybe there aren't even men and women. Maybe we need to rethink the entire, right? Like around the world, they're not having this conversation in China, in Japan, in Africa, across the Middle East, like in South America. They're not having this conversation of how many genders are there and pronouns and do men actually need women? Do women actually need men? They're just like, all of this stuff is goofy. They're like, what are you guys even talking about?
What do they think about us? Yeah, I mean.
Man, I've been...
what do they do instead? That's
what do they do instead? Well, it's interesting. I mean, just in the past 6 months, I mean, I've been to UAE, I've been to Qatar, I've been to South Africa, I've been to Nigeria, I've been to Malaysia, I've been to Thailand. And when I do talk to people about some of this stuff, people who are from there, there's a big level of disbelief. Like, people don't even believe some of the things. They're just like, what? Like, what? I mean, did you guys see the Matt Walsh documentary, What is a Woman? Mm-hmm. And when he goes to the tribe in Kenya, and he's even just trying to explain the concept, and they're just like, what are you?
The translation. He's like, lost in translation. He's like, yeah, me too. I am too.
It's confusing, right? I mean, I had this viral tweet back in 2019. I'm sure you saw, where I identified as a woman and I broke the British women's deadlift record. And to people in the UK and US and Canada and Australia, it was hilarious. To some people in many parts of the world, they were like, I don't get it. They're like, what do you mean you identified as a woman? What does that even mean? They're like, you're a man. Like, so the humor didn't even land with some people because they're like, I don't even get what this means. What do you mean? Like, no one is saying that men are the same as women. What is identifying as a woman? You have to even have the cultural context to explain that. If I showed you that tweet in 2005, you probably wouldn't have understood it. Oh, yeah. Right? You would have been like, what? What's the context for this? What does this even mean? So this kind of shows just how unmoored we've become from reality itself. And I think that when you forget all of these basics, or when you act like they don't exist, or you delude yourself to believe they don't exist, you always get problems, because biologically we're the same as our ancestors, right? We have the same. We're in a new context and we have new technology, but we have the same fundamental needs and desires. And, you've got the sort of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right? You've got the basic stuff at the bottom, food, shelter, water, and so on. Mm-hmm. But then higher up, you have things that people want. People want attention. People do want love. People do want a relationship. People want, a sense of meaning, a sense of purpose, and all of these things. And, coming back to what we were talking about earlier, you can still get and do all of these things in the traditional way that it's been done for thousands upon thousands upon thousands of years. And in my observation, the people who tend to opt more for that route, at least in part, do tend to be happier and more content. And there's even studies showing that. If you're someone who wants to take a different, totally different approach and try to sort of reinvent the wheel, you can, and it'll work for some people. We shouldn't base everything on exceptions. We should always accommodate exceptions within reason. But just because someone knows some guy or some woman who's 60 years old and never got married and never had kids and whatever, and they're totally happy and they're healthy, right? That's not the norm. I know those people exist, but if you were to say that that's the thing to aspire to, or that's the thing that's going to make most people happy, then you're doing a big disservice to people. You just end up with a lot of people who several decades from now, they're miserable and they're angry and they feel like they got lied to and they were sold, they were psyoped into this life of loneliness. And now those doors have closed. And I think that's a shame. So, I think we've lost balance. You know, you used a term I use a lot. You talked overcorrection. I think we're in the age of overcorrection on so many different issues. And it just needs to be brought back to that point of sanity. And I think it would help if people also just take a more mature approach with it. Because whenever you even talk about these things, like we can do this long form in this type of conversation in person, and it helps. If I attempt this conversation on social media, I immediately will have, so you're saying women should be forced into the kitchen, and you're saying women should be forced to do that? I'm like, when did I say, when have I said any of this? Right? I've never said anything about forcing this or forcing that or whatever. We're just trying to have a conversation about actually, okay, let's go back to the basics. We could go really back to the basics on a lot of this stuff. You could go around and interview a million 25-year-old women or 20-year-old women, a million 25-year-old men, say, okay, you know, what do you want in life? What are your goals? What are your aspirations? What are the things that concern you? What are the things you find out what they say? And I bet you're going to get pretty standard responses if people are being honest.